we are going to be reviewing Game of Thrones seasons 1 through 7. If we do it just right, we're pretty much going to review every season up until the premiere of season 8 of Game of Thrones. That is right, Martin. So we are going to be talking about just kind of the journey of where Game of Thrones have taken us. We're going to talk about our favorite moments, our least favorite moments, but we're going to do it by season. Martin, I have to ask you, and Christian, man, what was your introduction to Game of Thrones, and what did you think of season 1 of Game of Thrones?
I was late to the party, man. I actively resented Game of Thrones for, I think, 4 years. And then eventually someone who I really liked who did podcasting did like a 3-hour episode on Game of Thrones, and I felt personally shamed. So from then, I just went and I binge watched 40 episodes in like 4 days. That's what I did. Yay, college. So anyway, the point is, I came to it very late, but I watched season 1 and it was like blown away pretty much immediately, with the exception that I had to watch this pilot 3 or 4 times before I got through it. I know a lot of people have a problem with this pilot, so I kind of wanted to ask you guys too. It's this pop culture phenomenon now. We all got into it by episode 9 for sure. But did anyone else have a problem with this pilot initially?
Oh, how it's so funny you would say this, because as far as Game of Thrones season 1 for me, because I was on it right away only because I had so many friends who, plenty who had read the books and were like, oh man, I can't believe they're doing this. If they do this right, it's going to be awesome. Or you got to watch this. They kept talking about Song of Ice and Fire. So months of build up, and then it comes on, and I got HBO. I'm watching it. And I got through that pilot, and I was like, well, okay. And then the next episode, I'm like, I guess that was nice, I guess. By the third episode, I felt like I was watching just because all my friends were watching it. Yeah. And I was the guy who didn't want to say, it's not really doing it for me. And then out of nowhere, the mountain cut a horse in half. And I went, what the fuck? What? And I was pretty much hooked from that point on. It had my full attention from that moment.
I caught the tail end of season 1, right? And it wasn't, but I saw like episode 8, and I'm like, you know what? There's actually a lot of good stuff here. So let me actually go back and just watch it from there. Sure. So it wasn't until, we get one of the biggest shock moments, which now it has become a Game of Thrones thing to expect, right? Episode 9 is going to be the biggest WTF moment. It's going to be the biggest WTF moment.
I didn't recognize it. It's always 9. That's the one.
Yeah, it was episode 9, and it wasn't until post or after season 3 with the Red Wedding that the big WTF moment, for me anyway, was the Viper versus the Mountain, because that was episode 8. But, I'm getting a little carried away with myself. Let's just go back in time and just kind of talk about everything from Game of Thrones season 1. So, Christian, we see the introductions of the Starks, and we end up finding out here that, these guys... these are going to be the people that we come to follow, but it isn't just them. It's also the Lannisters. It's also the Mountain, the Hound. We this ensemble cast, and I think that was probably one of the hardest things for anyone to kind of watch or just really get into a show where you're like, okay, not only is there a plethora of characters I have to follow and know
and plots.
I have to know their backstory, and of course they couldn't make the names easy, right? You have someone like Viserys, you have Daenerys, you
have Tywin, and you have Tyrion.
Yeah, it goes on and on.
Bronn. I mean, there's no creativity there. They're just changing the vowels. You know what I'm saying? So, the names got really confusing, but I think that's one part of the show that really set it apart early on, because this is going to be a weird comparison, but I really liken it to The Wire, in as much that The Wire is about telling these like crazy micro stories on opposite ends of the spectrum that eventually intertwine. So obviously there's not a bunch of cops and robbers and stringer bells in Game of Thrones, although that would be fucking amazing. It's still a very unwieldy kind of story that has so many disparate parts that end up colliding at the end. And I think that's what is a selling point, but you're right. It's like a lot of dedication. You need to commit to that. And sometimes that's really hard to do if you're uninterested in the first couple episodes like Martin was.
And also, you got a lot of people in here who look alike. Like, I had the hardest time telling Jon Snow from Robb Stark.
Yeah. From the get-go? Yeah. Yep. And it's interesting. Let's go ahead and just kind of talk about Jon Snow. So again, it's fascinating to see where these characters are now.
Sure.
Post or leading up to season 8, but seeing these guys, and seeing the actors again with their baby faces and looking so young and innocent. And again, I think even as the audience, knowing that like, hey, listen, this is going to be like a Lord of the Rings tale-esque story, right? And the good guys are going to triumph and all that stuff. And Game of Thrones to me was the first show where it makes you realize, listen, the good guys don't win. Don't always win. The bad guys will win.
Yeah.
They'll win for a long time. And that's what life is all about sometimes. So you kind of have to deal with it for what it is.
Yeah, no, that first season is frustrating. Well, I guess the series in itself until you get used to it. But you watch fiction, especially when it's good versus evil. It's all about watching good triumph or justice being served. And this is a story where justice works on its own timetable when it decides to show up at all. It's just like, most of the time when a character who deserves their comeuppance or to die, by the time they get it, they've been in the power seat so long that the revenge is just not worth it. It's not even sweet enough. Like, with so many of those people, you're like, Jesus, are they ever gonna kill him? And when they do, you're like, yeah, but he's done so much shit up to this point. That one death doesn't equal. It's not worth it for all that. So there's not that feeling of gratification at the end.
Right now, we have the Starks and the Lannisters. They end up meeting up together because what ends up happening is that the hand of the king, right, ends up dying through poison one day, and then from there, King Robert himself, which I wish I had an image for him, but
Fred Flintstone.
Fred Flintstone, yeah, he comes up to good old Ned over here, and he's like, "Hey, I need you to become the hand of the king and help me kind of rule the kingdom because we've had peace for 17 years, Martin. So it can't be all good, rainbows and." I said sunflowers. Wow. It can't be all just full of jubilance all around here, right? So, and then from there, we get the story and we understand who these families are and kind of what makes them tick and just kind of the motion set from Littlefinger himself, one of the characters that we end up knowing very well throughout the course of this show, right?
Right. Yeah. And Ned Stark has always been very forthright and honorable and follow the rules. And he's placed in a situation where people just aren't doing that anymore.
It's a really confrontational and terrible world, and being good and being honorable is going to get you killed. And Ned learns that lesson later in the season.
We think, for the most part, that season 1 is all going to be about him, right? Like him and King Robert talking about the glory days of Robert's rebellion, and that's why Daenerys, we have to kill her right now because she's a big threat with the Dothraki army and all that stuff. Played by Aquaman himself, Jason Momoa. Which, man, this is the first time you end up seeing him. You're like, yeah. I think this man can pretty much decapitate me, So yeah, he's a huge threat. But going back to Ned, it really is interesting to see that this man and Littlefinger even actually echoes throughout the season. You not trusting me is one of the wisest things you've done. Season 1 is pretty much the only time we see all the Starks together. Yeah. And I think it's right at the beginning of episode 2. They slowly start drifting off, into their own, camps and all that stuff. And it's great to see how family is just such this important thing, even within the Lannisters themselves, right? And we end up finding out, although there's some incest happening, right, between Cersei and Jaime,
nothing but
just some casual incest, nothing big about it,
And they're twins on top of it all.
Although we do see a lot of family love happening in this show, we also find out, why someone like Tywin is this hard father figure to these people and why they all act the way they do, and we even see introductions of Tyrion throughout this show where he's trying to do the good thing, although he's portrayed as the bad family member, right? Or the guy we should root against. So
actually, he's portrayed as the guy that the rest of the Lannister family hates. So we hate them. So the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's one of the things that endears him to us.
Christian, let's go ahead and kind of go all the way to the east and talk about the Dothraki and Daenerys and kind of where her journey starts with this show, from nothing to ending up getting some baby dragons towards the end of season 1. So, Christian, I'll kind of let you talk about Daenerys and her journey in season 1 of Game of Thrones.
Looking back, I just rewatched all of season 1, and again, I'm very critical of the early part of the season. But I will say that it's actually way more forgiving when you're rewatching it, because they have so much story that they have to set up. Right, that pilot has the responsibility of making you go to different parts of the world on opposite continents and understanding the important players of who all these people are. So, the Dany storyline is largely removed from every other storyline in the season, but it's not any less important, and they spend a great amount of time there, right? So, yeah, initially when you come into it, she's kind of, been sold into, I don't want to say slavery, into wifehood. I don't know what you want to call it. It ain't pretty, at the behest of her brother, because he's trying to regain his rightful throne. So expositionally, there you go. That's basically where we find ourselves until she ends up with Cal. And it's really a season about her kind of finding her own agency and power, and also realizing that she's the dragon and not her creepy ass fucking brother who looks like a Malfoy brother.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, no, it's interesting to see where her character goes, because she is this frail girl who wants nothing but the best, and she's actually pretty innocent all throughout this, right?
Yeah.
Even when you get the moment where Khal Drogo ends up becoming he gets that cut in his chest, and then it's the witch who ends up pretty much worsening, the
making
the damage,
infection spread, and
and saying, hey, listen, I helped you. Why didn't you save my husband? And that witch was saying, well, listen, by the time you helped me, I was already raped 3 times, and if anything, I did you and your future baby a service by not making it a thing at all, right? There's not going to be a baby Khal Drogo to rule the world, because I'm going to stop it right here.
Yeah.
And I think for Daenerys, that's one of the first things that she learns in this journey of Game of Thrones, that listen, be trusting, but don't take people's shit, right? Or don't take their word for it every single way.
It's sad for her, because she's had this hard life with this brother who, sold her into marriage for his own ends. She's loses her virginity in not a gentle way. And
the first season of Game of Thrones, listen, now it's tame, but there's a lot of fucking happening.
Not all of it consensual. And then she embraces the culture. She goes hey, this is my situation, I'm gonna go with it, be the queen and all this. And then that witch kind of fucks her over, and then she's back to being at the bottom again, until she gives birth to the dragons. And then it's all right, now I'm going to run this shit for real.
Yeah, definitely. And we also see the introduction towards the end of this show of mysticism and magic and all that stuff, because we see the White Walkers at the very first episode, the very first shot, I think, right? Yeah. But we don't really see magic introduced until we see everything happening with Daenerys,
exactly,
all the way in the east, right? With the dragons hatching and all that stuff, and even realizing we get little bits throughout the end of season 1 where it's oh, she's not burned, the fire doesn't do her any damage and all that stuff. So it's really cool that we see the introduction of that. But I actually like that Game of Thrones don't really throw all the magic at you. It's just kind of like wise tales, right? Where White Walkers are a thing, but maybe not. Dragons are a thing, but probably not. Yeah.
I was just going to say quickly, I mean, that's I think one of the themes of the entire story is about how man conquered nature and magic and stuff like that. And it's only on the fringes. So when we see magic in Game of Thrones initially, it's all the way in the east and all the way well above the wall in the north, right? It's it's about magic that was banished from the land. But I think the majority of what the seasons kind of are, especially with the White Walkers coming and all that stuff, is about magic and nature fighting back. You know what I mean? That's what the winter kind of represents. So I think it's really interesting that progressively each season, you've seen more and more mysticism, more magic. I think season 2, we end up seeing that weird sorcerer guy, what I'm talking about? So that's a lot of that's upcoming, man. They tease a lot of it now, and I think that's what's really amazing about the first season.
So let's go ahead and just talk about one of the more grounded WTF moments is something Game of Thrones have now done, like I was mentioning earlier in the show, Martin, is that Episode 9 is a big WTF moment, and we see, spoilers if you haven't caught up by now of what we're talking about, Ned Stark ends up dying. This was one of the most shocking things for me because there's some bits here and there that I've got spoiled for me, but Ned dying wasn't one of them. So when it happened, it was really like, no way he's going to die because we spent so much work with him as a character and following where he's going, right?
Well, it's not simply that. It's the biggest thing is that whole setup with him at the chopping block. We've seen a lot of scenes like that where it looks like somebody's about to be executed and then they aren't. Maybe somebody swings in on a rope, they get a last minute pardon, something is said by a random member of the crowd. Those get called off all the time. So it's shocking that it went through, but more than anything, because our biggest name actor is the one there. Like, you watching all this and you see he's about to get executed, and you're like, well, not this guy. He's the show. Mm-hmm. He's the main character. He's the actor everybody knows. He's the face. So once you see that, like, oh, well, if they're willing to kill him, then I don't think anybody's safe.
Yeah.
No, this is when the legend of the show, I think, was born. I mean, they've repeated themselves progressively in other seasons, and of course, the Red Wedding is like this horrific, legendary benchmark in TV history. But this is the moment, because you're right. We've seen it a billion times where there's an 11th hour rope swing or like a fucking sniper or some shit. But the guy gets out barely with his life. And this was the moment where you're like, okay, we're not watching that same story a billion times. They're doing something new, and they continue to do that, which is really amazing to me. I also think we're doing slightly a bad job of explaining why this guy was going to be killed anyway, just because the crux of this is this like a conspiracy that happened, right? We didn't talk about Bran being pushed out of the tower, but there was a bunch of inciting incidences that kind of led to why this whole war broke out. The biggest one, I think, was the revelation that Joffrey is not Robert Baratheon's kid. Like, that's a really big deal to the story. Here's my beef with that, and I just want to turn this over to you when I say this. The whole revelation of him being, Jaime Lannister's kid is what? Ned going, looking through the history books and just being like, this one was born with black hair, this one was born with black hair. This is a fucking blonde kid. He must not be fucking Baratheons. You know what I'm saying? Like, it just seemed like one of those, had no one brought up the fact that, like, he's got blonde hair. That doesn't necessarily mean the paternity of his dad is completely off, right?
Yeah, that you have to figure that in this world they don't understand how DNA works. That I mean, genetic wise, he could have easily had a kid that was born with blonde hair if it was from a mother with blonde hair. It happens. I looking back at this, I go, oh, well, the reason Ned died, what it comes down to is that he found out something he shouldn't, something that people want to keep hidden. And instead of just going directly to the person, he went to the perpetrator and said, I'm going to tell what you did. And as we know, that always gets you killed.
Yeah.
If you're going to report something, you just quietly do it. You don't go to them and go, man, I saw what you were up to. And when the chief gets back, I'm letting him know.
Yeah.
You are not letting anybody know anything.
Think about the fact that he had the upper hand, and like Renly even came to him and was like, yo, I'll get you 100 men. You need to just take care of this situation. Yeah. And he's too honorable to have taken the advantage when he had it.
I can get 100 good men right now, surround Cersei, and the whole scope of this show would have been changed.
Would have been
if
done.
honorable fucking Ned Stark just would have had some sense, right?
Yeah,
because of course he's so honorable, ladies and gentlemen, that he's like, you know what? Well, I don't want Robert's last dying words to be, or his name to be stained upon if we have some bloodshed happening within this kingdom of King's Landing, Martin, which we know throughout the show is just nothing but bad news. Like, that's the one place, if you're like, hey, where would you want to live in if we're playing Game of Thrones? It's fucking King's Landing, okay? And let's go ahead and just kind of talk about, now that we know that the story is pretty much about Daenerys and Jon Snow, just kind of jump Jon Snow's journey all throughout season 1. So we see Jon trying to do the right thing and trying to be honorable and kind of stay true to his words, right? When he takes the vow to kind of take the black, but then when he ends up finding out the assassination of, Ned, right? He wants to go back, and it wasn't until Aemon Targaryen ends up telling him where he's like, listen, man, you think you got it bad? Well, you really don't, and these are kind of the moments now where you have to live up to your word and be the man that you want to be, and ironically enough, because he sticks it through and become, when the Night's Watch, we see his character progress through this fascinating journey, and I think it's really just something important to highlight.
Yeah. No, he's one of the most put upon characters because he gets over there to the wall and he's constantly getting hazed, which I'm like, all right. It's like, wow, I just wanted to get away because I got tired of people calling me a bastard 6 times every day, and now I come over here and I got to deal with you guys, but I'm trying to do the right thing, trying to step up. Yeah, and it did seem like, hey, leaving to go fight with his brother was the right thing, but it ultimately works out that they talked him in a stand.
His arc for the entire show is the most interesting thing, him and Dany, because it's going to end up coming down to those forces as we see going into season 8. So yeah, man, I think they did a really good job with him because they show him as a angry young man, and you throughout the season kind of see him let go of that and become more rational and more logical. The problem here is that I think, and let me ask you guys, still doing this honor shit, right? And it's going to lead to a detrimental ending for him, which is like, you cannot be this honorable. It feels bad. I mean, I know he's somehow alive, spoiler alert, into this next season, but it's almost like he survived despite himself because he's too honorable.
You're absolutely right. It's painful to watch the same mistakes being made, and you go, oh, that's right. When all that stuff was happening, he wasn't there to see it, so he still has that old mentality of always do the right thing in his head.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? Let's go ahead and just kind of switch things over and talk about the Lannisters because I quickly spoke about them, but man, I've never had a show made me love to hate someone as much as I did with Cersei, just right away into season 1, right? Where she ends up, loving her children so much that, at the expense of Sansa's direwolf, sure, let's kill the direwolf off. Yeah. For the sake of my son to ascend into the throne, let's just rip apart that letter that my husband, who just passed away, had any importance of. And let's just also now realize that you hate me, but you're going to hate my son even more.
Right.
And man, it's so great to see just people hate someone as much as you do, right, in a show. Because listen, even for what Breaking Bad was and what people may think of, the Walking Dead, like the governor, like, oh my God, this is a big bad. No, like you hated Cersei, like pretty much from the get-go, right? Although there was that very important moment and conversation she had with her husband where, she said, did you ever love me? And he's like, no, I didn't. I loved Lyanna, and she had to hear that for 17 years. So there's something really awesome that Game of Thrones does that I already despise you, but those few character moments that you get sprinkled in where you're like, yeah, you hate that person, but they're actually more than just this one-dimensional person that you may think.
Well, I you know what? I didn't hate her as much, and especially with that conversation she has with Robert Baratheon about how he never loved her. I was like, yeah, they've just all been miserable. But I didn't hate her nearly as much as I hated Joffrey or even Jaime, because I was like, all right, so right off the bat, this guy killed a kid so he could continue fucking his sister. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, yeah, you don't win me back from that. And granted, his characters have done several things, because I had people who read the books, they're like, oh, you're going to change your mind about him. I was like, sure. I really don't think so. But sure enough, he has done some things since then where I was like, all right, maybe I don't hate him, but I still remember what he did.
Let's just kind of go ahead and just talk about favorite moments within season 1. Christian, I'll kind of I'll bring it back to you. What was one of the standout moments of season 1 for you, and just kind of what it meant with the show that you are now going to watch that is Game of Thrones now, that we all know to love?
I think episode 5 starts with this scene where Barristan Selmy and Ned Stark are kind of reminiscing about how I'm really glad I didn't ever face you on the battlefield. You know what I mean? And there's this whole idea again that you are in the middle of a much, much larger story, that there's all this other history that already happened. But I also like the mutual respect of those guys because they are older generation. They have honor. They're respect bound, which I really dig. Other little things like that, which is something I really liked, which is there's this conversation with Ned and Jaime in episode 3, I believe, where they kind of address the Mad King of it all. Mm-hmm. And you kind of get the initial story of the Kingslayer. There's a scene where Ned talks shit about his armor. He's like, his armor is shiny and doesn't have any scratches on it at all. And then in a later scene, you see Barristan Selmy, and he has the exact same armor, but it's all scuffed and scratched up and stuff like that. It's just like little character details like that I really love. I mean, the other thing is this. Tell me how you feel. Like 60% of the people who we follow in this season are not in the current version of this show anymore. Yeah. So like rewatching it was just really interesting because I kind of forgot how I felt to spend time with Ned or with Rob or with Catelyn or any of these people. Mm-hmm. It was kind of cool to go back and see that Game of Thrones was a completely different show at one point with different dynamics.
One of my favorite moments was actually a conversation Arya has with Ned, where Ned is like, one day you're going to get married, you're going to go into this High Lord and make little, siblings that are going to be, big knights and, big rulers one day. And Arya's like, that's not me. That's not me at all, and I thought it was really great because a woman in this era just being against the societal norms from the get-go is already hard for her, but for her to stand her ground, even as being as young as she is and where she is now, really says a lot. And it's really interesting. Go ahead.
That would be sweet if she didn't end up becoming a fucking psychopath. I mean, that's the problem, man. Like, she just became crazy as fuck in these later seasons.
Mm-hmm. But if we're just talking about season 1,
I mean, she adapted to her environment, unlike her dad.
The beheading of Ned Stark was hard to see. But for me anyway, at the time when I'm like, okay, because it's going to be Robb Stark that's going to just wipe the slate clean with the Lannisters, and we're all going to come cheering and all that stuff. And I honestly cannot wait till we talk about season 3 of Game of Thrones, because I think no one saw any of that happen. And just kind of leading up to that event, right? With the assassination of Ned Stark, we're like, you know what? Where we are right now, we're going to root for Robb. And of course, I hate the Lannisters, And just kind of seeing that moment is really great because now you see those character developments with Robb and Catelyn, and just knowing that like, hey, we always have to have a Stark in Winterfell and the importance of that. Again, bringing it back to the family and these emotional moments. As gullible as we all were in season 1, thinking what it might become in later seasons.
Well, I always had a problem with two things about what you're talking about, was that they kept talking up, and I don't know if it was the show itself or just my friends who read the books, but there was so much talking up what a great military strategist Robb was and what a great swordsman Jon Snow was. And yet, by the end of the season, I was just like, I'm not really seeing that. I mean, I hear you guys saying it. Yeah. I hear other people saying it, but it's not really being demonstrated to me. Even to the very end, I don't think those things got demonstrated to me all that well. But maybe Jon Snow later on, but it took a while. I love Bronn. He became my favorite character. Him and Tyrion both together. When I think about my two favorite moments, the subtler moment is where Sansa was about to push Joffrey off the bridge. Ooh, yeah. And the Hound comes up and stops her, but just pretends like, oh no, I just need to wipe something off your face. Yeah. I was like, that was really cool. It just showed a lot about his character, that he wasn't evil, that he did see what was going on, was kind of like, girl, I can't let you do this. Yeah. But my favorite moment is when Daenerys' brother gets the molten gold poured on his head. Yeah, that was glorious.
Oh yeah. What did Khal Drogo say? He said a king, a crown for a king, or something like that. He just dropped that.
Yeah. What is your self-proclaimed favorite season of Game of Thrones? And you don't have to give me a big explanation as to why, but like I kind of want to know why. What generally about that season?
Yeah. Martin, if it's all right with you, I will go first. For me, Christian, you know that season 2 was my favorite season for the longest time. There was something about the whole chess pieces of like the 5 kings and kind of moving on where they want to go, right? To kind of rule the Iron Throne. That was really fascinating to me, right? Because at that point now, like the Starks versus the Lannisters has become a thing, but now we have these other outsiders, and seeing the introductions of these other houses were really great to me, right? Like House, not Martell, which
Dorne.
is the. Wait, what'd you say?
Dorne?
Dorne? No, not. Oh, wait, no, it is Martell, right? With the flowers? Yeah. House Martell, and just kind of seeing more of the Baratheon side of Stannis, right? And who he is. I thought that was really great. But to bring it back, my favorite season is definitely season 4 of Game of Thrones. Season 4, because we get a lot of big WTF moments. Things where at this point now, after the Red Wedding of season 3, we're like, when are the good guys going to win? And although they don't necessarily win, we start seeing the people we hate slowly get their comeuppance.
Yes, I agree with you. That's probably be my favorite as well, because it was like after so long, I was like, I need this, because I'd gone through periods watching the show where it would just get so brutal, so ugly. The good guys would never win, or the bad guys would never get theirs. And I was like, I would have moments I was like, wait, why am I still watching this? This is actually kind of torturous.
Yeah.
So finally then it started to be like, all right, this is what I'm sticking around for. I get it.
What about you, Christian? What was your favorite season?
Yeah, I mean, probably 3 and 4. Like, I know it's a cop out. I like 4 a lot because the moments, like you said, are great, but specifically smaller character moments. I love the Hound and Arya. That's like maybe my favorite pairing off ever. And so I think that's great. But in terms of like, it almost feels like season 3 was the end and culmination of everything that story was about. It essentially ends the Stark story, aside from the straggling survivors, right? So I think that's like a really, really fascinating thing. My problem with 2 is that established how time kind of flowed, which we would have entire seasons where people were moving from this part of the map to this part of the map. And I think that's what makes season 7 suffer so badly, is they kind of stop adhering to the logic of time. You know what I mean?
I'll say.
With that question, I just want to ask you, what's your least favorite season? We don't have to dwell on that, but I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. But Martin, you might surprise me. What's your least favorite season?
Well, I feel like it's kind of a bandwagon thing to say the last season was, but it's such a mixed bag, because it was okay. You said things weren't happening quick enough. Now they are. It's like, yeah, you're right, but it's too much too fast. Yeah. It feels more like every other television show now with these beats, and not what it was. So just the fact that it deviated, it felt deviated from what it had been, that makes it the last season my least favorite.
Yeah, definitely. For me, Christian, you know it's season 7 again, and I have to tell everyone right away, because the worst season doesn't mean it was like the most I don't even know how to phrase this. So the worst season of Game of Thrones to me is season 7, but even the worst season of Game of Thrones is still better than a lot of TV out there. Yeah. So let me go ahead and just say that out there right away. I do remember a lot of people saying season 5 wasn't their favorite, because season 5 really is that one season where you're like, what happened in season 5? Right? I mean, what happened in season 5? But season 5 was also the introduction where, you had this amazing show that, when a great show does something stupid plot-wise just for the sake of a character moment or a Deus Ex Machina thing to happen, it's really hard to forget, right? And that's why season 7, even with all the time lapse and all that, I can give it a pass. But there was just something really atrocious in that Magnificent 7 episode. I forgot what it's called in season 7. It was I think it was episode 6, where Jon Snow and it was Thoros of Myr and the Hound, they all had to go beyond the wall to capture a White Walker to prove to Cersei that the White Walkers exist. Can we already acknowledge how stupid that already sounds right away?
It sounds like a thing in Zelda where you have to go get the thing before you can get the thing. You know what I'm talking about? Or like Red Dead, where it's just like you have to do this remedial task in order to get the weapon you need to beat the big boss later.
Let us know what you guys think is the best season of Game of Thrones, and if it's the worst season, or let me know what you think is the worst season of Game of Thrones. And let's talk about in the comments down below, just your favorite character moments within season 1. There's lots of things, we didn't talk about, and I know we also highlighted Martin. But, just please let me know what you guys think. And if this video does well, Martin, we will be going through seasons 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And, we'll have something more structured. But we wanted to make this video because now, again, everyone, Game of Thrones is upon us.